society thrives on stability. When there's great change in society, there's always turbulence. And technology thrives on rapid change. And so this is part of the crisis that we have in the modern world, is this loss of a conformity to norms. Like cultures have norms, and they're there for a reason. But we are still individuals. And within those cultural norms, we have our own personalities. And those personalities, I think one of the things about our culture is that outwardly people are all very different, but inwardly they're actually quite vacuous and similar in a lot of ways.
That's very interesting.
And
yeah, this is kind of inward conformity, notwithstanding the emphasis, or maybe because of the emphasis of authenticity.
Yeah, I read a book on the philosophy of tattoos, and one of the chapters in there was "I ink, therefore I am," and it was this idea of wanting to be, you know, I think people feel a lot of anonymity and a desire to assert themselves.
But also we live in a kind of market-driven culture, and often market-driven culture rather than simply market culture, which market is an important instrument. Market-driven culture often tends to have a quick rate of obsolescence because it also drives things. The result is, I'm thinking of a phrase from Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Maybe I shouldn't evoke it, but I think that document is diagnostically very interesting. Everything that is solid melts into air, he says at one point, right? And it's kind of a plasticity where one doesn't have a place to stand. You can make it up, or you can create stability with certain forms of decorum, social relations, but you can also there's something about the relationship to the divine also that gives this stability. Is that also
I think that's the source of weightiness.
Yeah.
I mean, without
otherwise you have unbearable lightness of being.
Unbearable lightness of being. That's it. And no real connection, because you know Kierkegaard's idea that you have to at least establish one true love. You have to really understand. Hence, the relationship between man and woman was so central to these religious teachings, certainly in the Abrahamic faith. I mean, I know Christianity has an ideal of, for at least the priests and the cardinals and things, an ideal of celibacy, complete and utter dedication to God. But still, it acknowledges the sacrament of marriage. This idea that this relationship of really unconditional love at best, when it's truly a relationship, that is how we're informed of love and understanding love. And that's why love is so central to the religious teachings. I mean, there's a lot of people that criticize Islam as not, I've seen this in many Christian books, you know, that it's not a love-based religion. But the reality of it is love was always identified as the highest ideal in the Islamic tradition. There were certain theologians that said you couldn't really love God because God is not of our species, and you could only truly love your own species. Ghazali says theologians say this know nothing of true religion. And this is why
I like Ghazali.
Ghazali's great.
We talked earlier, and I'll tie it with what you just said. I think it's a very important point. We talked earlier about a need for stability, for structures. And often people flee into artificially constructed structures that aren't good for them. So kind of rigidity of a meaning that's imposed upon them, and then flee out because they see how vapid the pleasures which have no particular meaning except satisfying my own limited desires. Presumably, I mean, I think of it in terms of in Christian faith, there's kind of unity. There needs to be unity between a meaning, which requires certain stability and certain expansion of the self to something larger than oneself, and pleasure and some kind of emotional fulfillment, or we might say joy as well. Do you see that tension in Islam? Maybe people who like to press with the thumb down in order to create those structures and forget about I think you're right somewhere, but the pleasure that the person has in God rather than in the worldly things. On the other hand, you've got kind of empty empty pleasures that lack the meaning.
Right. Well, I think, I mean, pleasure is an ancient just problem. It's one of the great ideas, right? Just the whole
Hope not just problem, right? You don't mean in that
well,
sense, right?
it's a problem in that it literally becomes an idol for many people. The pursuit of pleasure is literally becomes the goal of life, the hedonist.
Yeah, sure.
And there's a lot of, I mean, I like the concept.
But that's the empty one, right?
That's empty, and I think the problem with all pleasures is that they're temporary.
Yeah.
And that's where
they're not reference to something outside in a sense. You give yourself to nothing. You just take everything in.
Right. And I think in a true relationship, for instance, the relationship between a meaningful relationship with a man and a wife, the deepest pleasure is pleasuring the other. I mean, there's an incredible, and I think that's true. I have to believe that that's true in all deeply intimate relations. The desire to give the other, the gift of pleasuring the other.
So unity of meaning and pleasure is in love, right?
I think it is, and I think that, and this is why, you know, there's a beautiful verse in the Quran. It's actually several times. It's a very common that God is pleased with them and they are pleased with God. That this mutuality of pleasure.